All right, so get ready because today we're taking a deep dive.
Flow.
A deep dive into the mind of a young Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, this is going to be good.
But not just any Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
We're focusing on the one from The Secret of the Pyramid.
Okay, yeah.
And we're going to be examining him through a really fascinating lens.
Okay.
The Enneagram.
I love it.
Ever heard of it?
Of course.
Well, even if you haven't, stick around because we're going to uncover some really fascinating insights.
Yes, yeah.
Into personality, what drives people, and how we all see ourselves in the world. Plus, who doesn't love a good Sherlock Holmes story?
Absolutely. And you know what makes this deep dive particularly interesting?
What's that?
We're going to be looking at young Sherlock as an Enneagram Type 1.
Okay.
Specifically, the social subtype.
Interesting.
Which some people call the rigid character. It's a fascinating combination.
So for those of us who might not be, total Enneagram experts,
right?
Can you break down what makes a Type 1 tick? What are their core motivations?
Okay, so at their heart, Type 1s, the reformers, they have this burning desire for goodness and rightness. They have this strong inner critic always pushing themselves towards improvement, aiming to make the world around them a better place.
I see.
No, it's fascinating, though.
Yeah.
Because how this desire plays out can look very different depending on their subtype.
And in young Sherlock's case, we're seeing the social subtype in action.
Exactly.
So how does that actually manifest in his personality?
Well, what's really intriguing about young Holmes is that he isn't striving for perfection.
Okay.
He genuinely believes he's already achieved it, especially when it comes to his deductive method.
That's so true.
Right.
He's completely convinced that his way is the only right way.
Yes.
There's no room for doubt in his mind. Like that scene where he presents his deductions to his classmates.
Right.
He doesn't even present it as a theory.
Yeah.
It's just a proclamation of absolute truth. He's not testing the waters at all.
No.
He's laying down the law.
Exactly. And this unwavering belief in his own rightness.
Yeah.
It creates this rigidity in his thinking. He's inflexible.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, he can come across as quite superior.
He does. He really does.
Do you ever wonder if that unshakable belief comes from a place of deep-seated insecurity?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Or maybe even some childhood experience that made him cling to logic as a way to make sense of the world.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what might be going on beneath the surface of that cool, logical exterior.
Precisely. And this connects to what Naranjo, a key figure in Enneagram studies, called the social one's passion for being right.
Okay.
It's not just about finding the right answer, you see.
Right.
It's about being recognized as the one who holds the truth.
Yeah.
It's like they need that validation to solidify their place in the world.
Which totally explains the power dynamics we see in the film.
Yes.
Especially between him and Watson.
Oh, absolutely.
He always has to be one step ahead, proving everyone else wrong.
It's true.
Positioning himself as the ultimate authority.
Absolutely. It's like he has this unconscious need to dominate others. Almost as if by making them feel wrong, he can affirm his own rightness.
Interesting.
He takes on that mentor role with Watson.
He does, yeah.
Almost like he's saying, this is the correct way to think.
Yeah.
Which is a classic social one move, needing to be the model of perfection.
And you know what's so interesting about it?
Right.
It's like he's rebelling against traditional ways of thinking.
Right.
But his rebellion is to impose his own incredibly strict set of rules.
You've hit upon a key element of the social one there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Their rebellion often looks like a rigid adherence to a self-created system. It's almost paradoxical. They're rebelling by conforming to their own incredibly specific set of rules.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, does he rely so heavily on logic and deduction as another way to exert control?
I think so.
I mean, it's his trademark, but is it more than just a preference?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The social one, particularly the subtype, is often the most intellectual of the three. They wield their intellect like a tool to manage their inner world and exert control over their surroundings.
So it's about order.
It's a way of creating order
Okay.
in a world that might feel chaotic to them.
So for Holmes, then,
Yeah.
deduction isn't just about solving the mystery.
Right.
It's about maintaining a sense of order,
Yes.
validating his worldview, and ultimately solidifying his position
Yeah.
as the one who possesses the truth.
Exactly. And this ties back to Naranja's observation
Yeah.
of the social one needing to be the owner of truth.
Right.
You know, it's what gives them authority, both intellectually and morally.
That's fascinating.
It's almost as if they believe that by possessing the truth, they have a moral obligation to impart it to others,
Wow.
whether they want it or not.
It's fascinating how all these seemingly disparate traits come together to paint a very specific picture of his personality.
Right.
But we haven't even touched on his relationship with Watson yet.
Oh, we haven't even gotten started.
It's a whole other layer of this Enneagram puzzle.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I can't wait to dive into that.
And that dynamic is where we really see these social one tendencies play out in a fascinating way.
Okay, well, I am ready whenever you are.
All right, let's do it.
So we've been exploring how young Sherlock embodies all the traits of a social one.
Right.
That rigidity,
Yeah.
the need for control,
Yeah.
and that unshakable belief in his own infallibility.
Uh-huh.
But, I'm really curious to see how those tendencies actually play out in his relationships, especially with Watson.
That's a great point. Their dynamic is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, they seem like such an odd pair.
They do, yeah. You have Holmes, this detached intellectual observer who seems almost unfazed by emotions.
Yeah.
And then you have Watson, who's more grounded, more empathetic, and often a bit bewildered by Holmes's eccentricities.
But what's fascinating is that their differences actually highlight Holmes's social one patterns in such a clear way.
Okay.
You see it in how Holmes approaches their relationship.
Like how he's constantly trying to mentor Watson.
Exactly.
To steer him towards what Holmes believes is the correct way of thinking.
Yes.
That feels like a classic example.
It is.
Of the social one's desire to improve others.
Uh-huh.
But maybe with a bit of an agenda, right?
Precisely. It's not just about sharing knowledge.
Right.
It's about instilling his specific system of values and beliefs.
Oh, interesting.
Remember, Holmes is convinced his way is the right way.
He is, yeah.
And you see that in how he corrects Watson.
Yeah.
Often with a hint of impatience or even condescension.
It's almost like he sees Watson as a project to be perfected. You think there's an element of, if I can fix Watson, then my worldview is validated.
I think that's a very insightful observation.
Yeah.
It's like, by molding Watson in his own image, Holmes is reinforcing his belief that his way is the only right way.
Right.
It's almost a subconscious need to be seen as the model of rightness.
Okay.
Which, as we discussed, is central to the social one.
But here's what I find interesting.
What's that?
Despite this imbalance in their dynamic, Watson doesn't seem to resent Holmes.
Right.
He doesn't push back against that constant correction or judgment.
That's true.
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it might have something to do with that undeniable charisma that social ones can have.
Okay.
Even though they can be rigid and controlling.
Yeah.
They're often incredibly intelligent and engaging.
Right. They have that absolute conviction in their beliefs.
Yes.
Which can be both intimidating and attractive.
Uh-huh.
And in Holmes's case, his brilliance and passion for deduction are kind of infectious.
They are.
You can't help but be drawn in.
Exactly. So while Watson might feel exasperated by Holmes's know-it-all tendencies, he's also captivated by his intellect and that unique perspective on the world.
Yeah.
It's a complex dynamic.
It is.
But it works.
You know, it's funny because even though we might not all have a Sherlock Holmes in our lives, I think a lot of us can relate to that dynamic in some way.
Yeah.
You know, we've probably all known someone who's a bit too sure of themselves, a bit too quick to point out our flaws, but who also possesses qualities that we admire.
It's a universal experience. And perhaps by understanding these patterns through the lens of the Enneagram, we can navigate those relationships with a bit more awareness and compassion.
So the next time we encounter someone who seems like a classic social one, overly rigid or controlling, maybe we can pause and remember that those behaviors might stem from a deep-seated desire for goodness and order.
Yes.
Not just a need to dominate.
That's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the underlying motivation behind the behavior.
Right.
It doesn't excuse it.
Yeah.
But it helps us understand it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But before we move on,
Okay.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Right.
This idea that social ones often transform anger into coldness and control. I'd love to hear more about how that plays out in Holmes.
Okay.
Because he's the epitome of cool and collected.
Yes, that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
We talked about how social ones have a strong inner critic.
Right.
And that can lead to anger. But they often channel that anger into more socially acceptable forms.
So instead of outbursts, they become detached and analytical.
Exactly. He keeps his emotions tightly in check.
Yeah.
Preferring to analyze and dissect rather than engage with them directly. He's much more comfortable with logic and reason.
Right.
Than with messy emotions.
I guess that makes sense given his devotion to his deductive method.
Yeah.
Emotions would just cloud his judgment, right?
They would.
But doesn't that emotional control also create challenges in his relationships?
It does.
Especially with someone like Watson.
It definitely adds complexity to their dynamic. On the one hand, Holmes's emotional control allows him to remain objective and avoid getting swept up in the chaos of feelings.
But on the other hand, he might come across as distant and unfeeling.
Right.
Especially to those who don't understand his way of processing the world.
Exactly.
And, it makes you wonder what's going on beneath that calm facade.
There's definitely an inner struggle happening. Remember, social ones are constantly battling against their own imperfections, striving for a sense of order and control that can feel elusive.
Yeah.
That internal battle takes a toll.
So even though Holmes appears to have it all figured out, he's still wrestling with those inner demons, just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even the most brilliant minds have their own vulnerabilities.
And that's what makes him such a compelling character, right?
I think so.
He's not just a brilliant detective. He's a complex human being with flaws and struggles just like everyone else.
Yeah.
And by understanding those complexities, perhaps we can learn to be a little more compassionate and understanding, not just towards fictional characters, but towards the people in our own lives.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I do want to revisit this fascinating concept of inadaptability as a core trait of the social one. I feel like we've seen that play out so clearly in Holmes's character, but I'd love to unpack it a bit more.
Of course. It's a concept that comes from Oscar Picasso, one of the pioneers of the Enneagram. And it's so relevant to understanding the social one.
Okay.
Basically, it describes their tendency to cling to their own ways of doing things. Even when circumstances demand flexibility.
It's like they have this internal compass.
Yes.
That always points them in what they believe is the correct direction.
Exactly.
And they just can't deviate from that path.
Right.
Even when it might be beneficial to adapt.
Precisely. And in Holmes, we see this in his unwavering adherence to his deductive method. He's so convinced of its infallibility that he's almost incapable of considering alternative approaches.
I mean, it's his trademark, his superpower.
It is.
But is there a point where that rigidity becomes a weakness?
That's the fascinating paradox of the social one.
Really?
Yeah, their greatest strength, that unwavering commitment to their principles, can also become their biggest obstacle. They strive for perfection. But that very striving can blind them to their own flaws and limitations.
So while it's easy to admire Holmes's brilliance and dedication, it's also important to recognize the potential downsides of his unyielding approach.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what might happen if he was forced to confront a situation where his methods failed him.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Right.
It would definitely challenge his entire worldview, wouldn't it?
It would.
And that's a question we can all consider, even if we're not brilliant detectives.
Yeah.
How do we respond when our own deeply held beliefs are challenged?
It's a thought-provoking question to ponder.
It is.
Now, as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to bring everything we've discussed back to the listener.
Right.
What are some key takeaways that they can apply to their own lives?
Yeah.
We've spent this deep dive really unpacking young Sherlock Holmes's personality, viewing him through this lens of the social one subtype of the Enneagram. And I have to say, it's been pretty eye-opening.
It is, yeah.
To see how his seemingly cold and calculated nature actually comes from this intense desire for order and righteousness.
It's not just about being clever or right.
Right.
It's about a deeper need.
Exactly. And speaking of real-life applications, we keep coming back to this idea of inadaptability as a core trait of the social one. It's like a recurring theme in Sherlock's personality.
It is, yeah. You're right. It's this concept from Oscar Acaso, one of the early Enneagram thinkers, that really captures the essence of the social one. It's their tendency to cling to their own ways of doing things, even when it might be better to be a little more flexible, to adapt to the situation at hand.
Yeah, it's like they have this internal rule book that dictates the correct way to be, and they just can't deviate from it.
It's so evident in how Holmes clings to his deductive method no matter what.
It's like he's so convinced it's the only way. The right way.
And that unwavering belief is both his strength and his potential downfall, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's what makes him such a brilliant detective.
It does.
But it also makes him incredibly resistant to new ideas or approaches.
Yeah, it's almost like he's built a wall around himself, protecting his worldview from anything that might challenge it. It makes you wonder what would happen if he encountered a case where his methods simply didn't work.
That would be interesting.
Could he adapt? Or would he crumble?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not just a question for fictional detectives. I think it's something we can all reflect on. What happens when our own deeply held beliefs are challenged? Are we open to new perspectives? Or do we dig in our heels and resist change?
It's a really thought-provoking question. I think this whole conversation has really highlighted how much we can learn from fictional characters.
I think so.
Even ones as seemingly outlandish as Sherlock Holmes.
Absolutely. And by understanding these Enneagram types, you know, we gain a new perspective on the people in our own lives. We start to see those patterns of behavior, those motivations. And it can help us to approach those relationships with a little more empathy and understanding.
So the next time we encounter someone who seems rigid or controlling, maybe we can pause and remember that it might not be about them trying to be difficult. Perhaps it's coming from a deeper place.
It could be.
A need for order in a world that feels chaotic.
Exactly. And that understanding can make a world of difference
I bet.
in how we interact with them. You know, it's about recognizing that beneath those seemingly inflexible exteriors, there are often fears and insecurities driving those behaviors.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners walk away with?
Well, I hope they've gained a new appreciation for the complexity of personality and how understanding tools like the Enneagram can offer insights into ourselves and others. Maybe they'll even be inspired to learn more about their own Enneagram type.
Oh, that'd be great.
And what it reveals about their motivations and behaviors.
That's a great point. And I hope they've also gained a new appreciation for the character of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, me too.
He's not just a brilliant detective.
He's not, no.
He's a complex individual.
He is.
With his own unique set of strengths and weaknesses.
He certainly is. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has even sparked a new interest in the Enneagram.
It could happen.
It's a fascinating system that can offer endless insights into the human experience.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Into the Enneagram and the fascinating mind of Sherlock Holmes.
It's been fun.
We hope you've enjoyed it.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Love it.
There's a whole world of knowledge and insight out there.
That's right.
Waiting to be discovered.